It was Epstein that, quote, was very heavily involved in the illegal side of the company, from money laundering to espionage to arms trafficking. Most of this work was criminal. After that, Epstein was able to finance his criminal enterprise.
So recently, Candace Owens dove head into the dark past of Jeffrey Epstein. She covers many things relevant to Epstein's early life and upbringing that are still relevant today because, as it turns out, Epstein made numerous connections to the dark criminal underworld and intelligence services even from the get-go. She also brings up how these facts are relevant today, especially as there's a clear cover-up going on regarding the Epstein story. She's done a lot of research on this, so let's get her take on it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Now let's get back into Epstein's timeline. 1974. It's a few months after dropping out of the Courant Institute. Inexplicably, Epstein's then hired at that Dalton school, where our government guy got weird fantasies and books that he's publishing is heading up the school. And why is Epstein hired? Well, he's hired to teach mathematics and physics, despite not having a degree in either. Prestigious school, $50,000 a year. By 1976, Epstein is dismissed from teaching at the Dalton School. Parents were complaining about the weakness of his teaching. It also was alleged by the students that went there. NPR did a long article that he was often in the company of young girls that he's taught outside of the school. And this is a blurb from a New York Times piece. 8 former students who attended the prestigious school during Mr. Epstein's short tenure there said that his conduct with teenage girls had left an impression that had lingered for decades. One former student recalled him showing up at a party where students were drinking, while most remembered his persistent attention on the girls in hallways and classrooms. She said, "I can remember thinking at the time that this is wrong." That is a quote from Scott Spicer, who graduated from Dalton in 1976.
Yeah, so many oddities about Jeffrey Epstein getting that initial job teaching at a prestigious high school, one of the most prestigious in New York, without any credentials. And yeah, you might say it's a private school, but actually, if you look into the history of it, it was really unconventional to get a job like that without any kind of teaching experience or credentials whatsoever. The guy who hired him was Donald Barr. Guess whose father that is? Bill Barr, who eventually became the Attorney General under George H.W. Bush, and he oversaw Epstein's confinement in Manhattan prison years later, right before, he died. So, just one of the many absurd elements in this case that doesn't make much sense. You can also see how Epstein's sexual proclivities were on display from an early age. Something was up there. He didn't get prosecuted in any way for that. But it was also weird how he started to show up to parties that were going on when he was the teacher. So yeah, there's many oddities to this. And again, he had no credentials, dismissed because of this. And, still rose up into the ranks of high society, as we'll come to find out.
Well, no matter, because, then he left. And in 1978, the legend goes, kind of hand of Midas, touch of Midasing all of this. Legend goes that through a connection at the school, he was tutoring someone's kid, and then he somehow gets into the situation where he meets the CEO of Bear Stearns. And that CEO is Alan Greenberg, who then decides to make him a junior assistant on the trade floor, because he obviously knows nothing about finance. I don't even know if he knows anything about math or science either. But within just 4 years, he rises through the ranks and becomes partner. He is a limited partner at Bear Stearns. What? Don't worry, guys. By 1981, he departs Bear Stearns, and I'll tell you why. Some employees, by the way, say that he was fired, but Jeffrey Epstein has always maintained that he resigned out of his own free will after a relatively minor violation with the SEC that resulted in a relatively minor fine of $2,500.
Actually, I think that's a little mistaken. Not that the overall gist of that isn't correct, but actually what happened there was he got fired because of an internal wrongdoing that the firm worried about, that if this was discovered, it would cause an SEC violation. It wasn't because of the SEC itself. Also, Epstein actually disputed this and said he was actually dismissed because he loaned a friend some money to buy stocks, which was against internal company policy. And that person's name was Warren Eisenstein. I'm just looking at it on a separate screen here. Warren Eisenstein, and that's his story. And actually, when he mentioned this in the media, it didn't seem to be corrected by people he kept in good relations in Bear Stearns after he departed from there. So just maybe a little, that's been reported many different ways, but something to consider.
That's his story, and he's sticking to it, or he was sticking to it, or he is sticking to it. Who knows if he's alive. But curiously enough, his departure coincided with the opening, the very day that Jeffrey Epstein left. The SEC was actually opening a procedure to look into insider trading that they alleged had occurred in the context of a corporate takeover bid that was being led by Edgar Bronfman Sr., who was the head of Seagram's. Now, if that name's sounding familiar to you, Edgar Bronfman Sr., because yesterday I told you not to forget this name. I told you to remember the name Edgar Bronfman Sr. because he was the guy that was working at this time with Robert Maxwell, because he was also heading up the World Jewish Conference, and he was working with Robert Maxwell on the Refusnik crisis. Essentially, we want Russian Jews to come settle into Israel. The Russian government says, no, you can't do that. Why would we just grant visas for everybody to travel to Israel? I want to be clear, in this very year, in 1981, that is when Edgar Bronfman becomes the president of the World Jewish Conference and focuses on that project to lobby Russia to grant visas to Russian Jews to depart to Israel. And you have to ask yourself, now we know at that same time he's working with Jeffrey Epstein, and the SEC's looking in going, wait, I think some insider trading just happened here. You have to wonder what suddenly then convinces the Russians to allow that to take place. Or what convinced, by the way, the Russian Jews, for that matter, to want to abandon their homeland to move to the Middle East. Was there an incentive provided? Was there a financial incentive provided? I'm just asking questions. Was Robert Maxwell the only Israel firster hotshot that was committing financial crimes to help Israel? Because remember, he's robbing pensions. What's going on?
Yeah, and to be fair, though, this happened in the context in parallel to Epstein's dismissal. It doesn't seem like this ordeal played any role in his decision to leave the company. You can actually still go on the net today and find the memo that he sent to the CEO of Bear Stearns saying why he was not why, but that he was departing effective immediately, essentially. It was because he felt like he was wrongly fined, $2,500. He thought it was a lot of money. But this isn't where Epstein got all of his fortune. It actually turns out he only acquired about $200,000 in his 4 years of Bear Stearns. It doesn't explain why he rose from, a junior assistant to an options trader to be a partner at the firm by any stretch of the imagination. He had no credentials to do that, and it still remains one of the most inexplicable mysteries of this entire saga. But he did leave, and he did seem to be on good terms with some of the people back in Bear Stearns, and we'll see that he gets swept up in the shady underground after that. $200,000 was a lot of money back in this time. This is in 1981, I believe. But, now we wouldn't think of that as a lot. But, they say that Jeffrey Epstein died with $600 million. And many times it was reported that he was a billionaire. He certainly lived the life of a billionaire. So he acquired his wealth outside of this, even though it seems like, it was a great thing for him to be a partner. It really was unexplainable.
Over here with these banks that are getting into trouble. I will note now that per a 2003 Vanity Fair article, the SEC never officially brought the proceedings against Bear Stearns for insider trading, but its questions seem to indicate that it was remarkably skeptical. The SEC body was remarkably skeptical of Epstein's answers. Vanity Fair writes that some sources wondered why, if he had such an important role at Bear Stearns, he's a partner, why would he have left over just a small fine of $2,500? Something else was clearly going on there.
Yes, certainly something else is clearly going on there. This is also the time where it's said that many of the people that have studied this case believe that Epstein developed his strategy to, not be arrested. And it was do the strategy of playing the box, it's called. The basic strategy involves blackmail. It's like if you embarrass someone in the process of committing crimes, they get so uptight about bringing it forward so as not to kind of ruin their own reputations or tarnish their own senses of stature in society. And that's how he got away with his crimes. We can see how that played out later in life when he gets involved in this sex trafficking ring.
Now, next part of Epstein's biography gets a little bit murky. And I want to tell you, by the way, what he was interested in. That's kind of like, what was his public life profile? You know, he had all of this money. We don't really know how he has it or how he gets it, but he's everywhere. And I'll tell you some things that he was passionate about. He's a passionate guy. He was passionate about issues relating to human consciousness, brain function, and also particularly transhumanism. Gosh, this is really becoming a theme, transhumanism. He had spoken about how he planned to freeze his body to be reanimated in the future when science allowed it. And he envisioned the insemination of dozens of women with his sperm in order to, quote, strengthen the genetic heritage of the earth. Now, I'm just going to park right here and just say that if that sounded like I could have been reading ideas from Elon Musk. That is something that he talks about a lot. He's interested in human consciousness. He's kind of doing this. And I have always maintained that there's something weird about Elon Musk's background. It gives me the Midas touch. It just doesn't. When I watch him speak, I just don't buy it. But parking aside, these were Epstein's ideas, not Elon Musk. They just would have been kind of the same. And that's what he wanted to do, this just to strengthen the genetic heritage of Earth, to inseminate dozens of women with his sperm. And he supported, therefore, germinal choice, which is a sperm bank of Nobel laureates. Okay? Jeffrey Epstein also, in this capacity, gave, of course, tens of millions of dollars in donations to Harvard. I say, of course, because as we have learned, Harvard is running some sort of a Mossad operation. I feel very confident to state that it's very clear to me and that you are seeing all of these people that are going through Harvard, mysteriously getting in, not very bright people, and suddenly put into positions of power.
Yeah, with Harvard, it's just a crazy saga in regard to this tale, to this story, because Epstein was given essentially a private office within Harvard, even after his conviction for child abuse. Had 40 witnesses in Florida after the conviction, I believe 2006 or 2007, that sweetheart deal he got from Alex Acosta, who eventually became the labor secretary. Well, Acosta gave him this deal where he basically got to carve out part of the sheriff's department, live there, have work release where he only had to be there 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and he still got to travel to all of his properties throughout the world during this stretch. As a punishment, he got 13 months when there were 40 witnesses that he would, solicit women to come in and have them give him massages and then sexually abuse them in the process of that, and have them recruit others to do that and continue the cycle. And Ghislaine was part of facilitating that as well. For that, he got 13 months, this sweetheart deal, and we've never gotten to the bottom of why. We know that Acosta said, hey, at one point someone told me that he was intelligence and I should lay my hands off him. But this deal was done without even the victim's consent, which violated victims' rights, by the way. So that's where we were there.
So I think that is a fair thing to surmise. I'll say it's my opinion. Better be careful because Harvard's coming down on speech at the moment. Now, he then made, Jeffrey Epstein, some curious donations, given the fact that he does not have any children. He donated $25,000 to a children's tennis club in Maryland. He donated $30,000 to a preschool in New York. He donated $15,000 to a private girls' school that is a stone's throw away from his New York mansion. In 2017, he made another $50,000 donation, this time to the UJA, which is the Federation of Jewish Philanthropies of New York, and they are openly committed to world governance. They are openly committed to establishing this one world government.
Yeah, to be clear, this was during what was kind of a rehabilitation tour, or an attempt to do that by Epstein after his conviction for sexual offenses. And the word got out on this, by the way, to the general public, and still you had Ehud Barak visiting him 30 times and living at his mansion. And, Bill Clinton's still hanging out with him after that, right? Alan Dershowitz, obviously. At that time, he was going through an effort where he was trying to rehabilitate his image with the public, try to fix his reputation that was clearly damaged, despite the fact he wasn't really punished for it. And still, the reasons for that are just totally absurd. They've spinned in circles trying to explain that to the public, but he was trying to rehabilitate his image.
Epstein also gave to a ton of politicians. I'll give you some of them right here. Some interesting names on this list. You can look through this, but yeah, President George H.W. Bush definitely stands out. Former Secretary of State John Kerry stands out. I know the Clintons are on the list as well. Governor John Kasich is on this list. Senator Chuck Schumer is on this list. It is quite telling. He primarily gave to Democrats, but it is quite telling which Republicans he decided to give to. Former Senator Bob Dole. It's definitely something that I think deserves, somebody should definitely prod that narrative and see what motivated him to give to these people, especially in states that he didn't live in. Now, jumping back into our timeline, 1981, this is this big year, right? You've got him with Edgar Bronfman. Edward Bronfman is working factually with Robert Maxwell, and that was also the year 1981 that began the Iran-Contra affair that we discussed yesterday. The Iran-Contra affair is what connects Epstein to Robert Maxwell, not just via Edgar Bronfman, but also through the Refusenik scandal, but also, as Ari Ben-Menashe told us, the insistence at that time was coming from Robert Maxwell in his office in London, telling them that they needed to just let Epstein into the arms discussion, right? Let Epstein into this, include him. Your bosses have told you this guy is good, and now you've got to include him on these arms deals. And Ari Ben-Menashe was like, even though we were instructed to, we thought he was an idiot, we thought he was incompetent, and so we did not involve him. But yes, he ended up getting together a nice little business of blackmailing American politicians. Okay. What happens in 1987 then is kind of relevant because it is, rather appropriately, a British defense contractor. His name was Douglas Leese, okay? So someone who contracts weapons and technology to a nation's military. It was him, Douglas, who recommended Jeffrey Epstein as a genius with no morals to Stephen Hoffenberg. Stephen Hoffenberg was the CEO of a financial company called Towers Financial Corporation. Okay. So we should just acknowledge right now, make it clear that before we get into what happens with Towers Financial Corporation, what Ari Ben-Menashe told us is obviously true. I'm just trying to help out this administration, by the way, because they're saying they don't know whether or not Jeffrey Epstein was tied to another government. They have no idea.
Yeah, it's absurd. It seems like Pam Bondi could do her due diligence and find some of these connections if she really wanted. I think they know, and they're just dismissing that. But yeah, Epstein got involved in arms trafficking deals because Doug Leese was one of the biggest arms traffickers in the world. So was Adnan Khashoggi, the Saudi national who lived kind of a playboy-like lifestyle where he was facilitating arms transfers. Epstein got wrapped up in kind of a group of these people. And if you know anything about Iran-Contra, as part of that, rogue officials in the Defense Department, in violation of the law, blatant violation of the law, which prohibited this, but it's something they wanted to do anyway, including Ollie North, decided to funnel arms to Iran. It was to kind of prolong the Iran war, which the U.S. had supported Iraq up until that point, prolong the war, get the defense contractors' pockets continued to be lined, and there were hostages in Lebanon that they were saying that, arming Iran is going to help provide some leverage to get those hostages released. Well, in the process, the arms got smuggled through Israel, actually. So the arms went from the United States to Israel and then to Iran. That was to try to get around this law and make it seem like it's more of a deal, to Israel rather than being culpable by sending them directly to Iran. And by all accounts, Khashoggi was in on this. He played a major role in it. And to the extent that Epstein was directly involved is unclear, but he was working with Khashoggi in some context. In fact, when Epstein started his own company, IAG, technically Khashoggi was like his only client. He said that I only take billion-dollar clients to manage their money, but there really wasn't even any evidence he was managing much money. He could have been involved in some of these scandals. We just don't have the paper trails to be exactly sure, but he certainly was working with Khashoggi at one point.
If he was working for another government's secret service, they'd have no idea if he had ties to intelligence services elsewhere. This is the answer. If I can do this from my house, I feel like maybe the feds could do this. Maybe start with Ari Minaj, who's on record saying that. Maybe start with these other people who are telling you how they're connected. Start with Bronfman, look into that whole thing. I'm just trying to help out the United States government here. Anyways, this confirms that what Ari Minaj said was true. That Robert Maxwell got Jeffrey Epstein involved in weapons. And Vicky Ward, by the way, who is a journalist, reported also that Epstein had operated on behalf of the Saudi arms dealer Adnan Khashoggi. Now, if you're remembering the whole Khashoggi thing, you're like, oh, I remember that name, Jamal Khashoggi. It was like the quote unquote journalist that did not brutally was murdered. He was a quote unquote just a Washington Post columnist, Jamal Khashoggi. No, he was not. He was not just a Washington Post columnist. His uncle, Adnan, and this is according to the U.S. Defense Intelligence Report, was cited as one of the largest drug exporters from Colombia in the 1980s and the 1990s. And also Viktor Ostrovsky, we mentioned him yesterday. He is the guy that defected from the Mossad. He also claimed in his book that Adnan's loyalty, however, was not to Saudi Arabia, but was actually to the Mossad. He was apparently a long-time recruit of the Israeli Secret Service.
Well, there's no doubt he did work on behalf of Israel, but I think, Khashoggi was one of these guys that was kind of like Maxwell. He was kind of a free agent, it seemed like, to some extent. Now, Maxwell did do a lot of intelligence work for the Mossad. He was given a Mossad-led funeral, essentially buried on the Mount of Olives, where Israeli prime ministers and the heads of Mossad came for that essentially state-run funeral. But Khashoggi was like that too. He was notorious for it. He was probably one of the most prominent people in the world at that time, an international kind of superstar that facilitated these money movement efforts. And that was something that Epstein was involved with too. He did a lot of that work for Bear Stearns. It started out to be, things related to tax mitigation strategies that rich people wanted to do, and then delved into the criminal underworld of moving money, facilitating arms deals, etc. The amount of information we have isn't enough to show exactly what Epstein was doing when, but he was certainly involved in this entire web of duplicity and criminal enterprise.
Okay. So it is very clear that Jeffrey Epstein was working with, for, and around the Mossad. I mean, it's an absolute nonsense to pretend that he wasn't. Maybe this also explains why he had a Saudi passport. Again, if we're able to figure this out from home, do we really think that Trump and the administration and Pam Bondi with all the files before them can't do that as well? Anyways, back to Tower Financial Corporation. Jeffrey Epstein's now there. A defense contractor recommends that he gets that position. And what happens is that it becomes one of the biggest Ponzi schemes in United States history. The biggest until Bernie Madoff would come years later. So Stephen Hoffenberg, the CEO, who at the time when this Ponzi scheme was going down, ended up going to prison for crimes related to their schemes and the bank's eventual collapse because of it. It's a Ponzi scheme. There's a massive collapse, right? He claimed that while at the bank, it was actually Epstein. It was Epstein that, quote, was very heavily involved in the illegal side of the company, from money laundering to espionage to arms trafficking. Most of this work was criminal. After that, Epstein was able to finance his criminal enterprise, the Financial Trust Company and J. Epstein and Company. There was another one, I think it was called International Asset Collections. He was able to finance all of that with the assets and money from the Towers financial crimes, end quote.
Yeah, absolutely. And to just clarify a little bit regarding this, Epstein did work for Tower Financial. He was actually given $2 million by Stephen Hoffenberg, who went down on this. He got like 18 or 20 years in jail, and I think he just died 2 years ago or something like that. But he was saying that, Epstein was very much involved in this. And from the information I can gather, indeed, Epstein was involved with this. So why didn't Epstein go down? Well, it looks like he was given immunity to cooperate with the feds and provide information about what was happening. Basically, what happened is what happens in a lot of these Ponzi schemes is they had a front to basically take money from new investors and then pay out older, more legacy investors and pocket some of that money. And that's exactly what happened. Over a prolonged course of time, Epstein was helping to do that. He was given a $2 million loan that he never ended up repaying to Hoffenberg, by the way. And Hoffenberg apparently respected him because he was a genius. He was great at selling securities. And here's the key thing. He had no moral compass. That's what Hoffenberg pointed out. So, if that tells you anything about Epstein, I don't know what else would.
So yeah, but Jeffrey Epstein, regarding towers going down, the Ponzi scheme, Jeffrey Epstein did not go down with them, because in 1993, Jeffrey Epstein left the Towers Financial Bank just before its collapse. So yeah, while Stephen Hoffenberg then spent 18 years in prison as the mastermind of the Towers Financial Corporation fraud, he actually claimed that it was Epstein who was the mastermind. He actually tried unsuccessfully to sue Epstein 3 times after he was released from prison in 2013. He said Jeffrey Epstein was the true architect, and Jeffrey Epstein had manipulated him. I got to tell you, I tend to believe that, given what we are seeing, these patterns. Yeah, I would think that someone sent him as an agent. I mean, the defense contractor definitely hired this guy. You can trust him. And then Jeffrey Epstein is actually working on behalf of who? Maybe not your company, maybe not America at all. These financial crimes, this pattern, Robert Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein, we are seeing it's very clear they're robbing the piggy bank. The people that suffer are the people whose pensions it was when Robert Maxwell robbed the pension funds of the Mirror Group.
Yeah, if there's anything clear about Epstein and his past and kind of a thread that runs throughout his entire life, it's, complete disdain for regular people. That, if you're not rich or up at the top of, the wealthy rung of society, you don't really have the same rights or capabilities or really same moral worth as someone that does. And you see that here. You see that everywhere throughout his life, really, if you study this guy. This guy was, just insane. He really did have no moral compass. That part was totally right.
In America, the same thing. When these Bernie Madoff scams, and they say, "Oh, the money's all gone, and your entire savings has been depleted, but you're just gonna have to work harder." I think we can probably stop there in the Jeffrey Epstein story, because next we need to get into his mysterious relationship with Leslie Wexner, because it's a very odd relationship. And I have to tell you, we are not really privy to much since they're locking everything down.
Indeed, the relationship with Les Wexner is an oddity too, one of the craziest kind of side tangents of Epstein's life, and really not side tangents. It's one of the most major ones because, as you know, if you study this case, Les Wexner, the head of L Brands, it's the parent company of Victoria's Secret and Abercrombie, and I think Bath and Body Works and a few others. He's one of the richest people in the United States, still lives in Ohio. By the way, it doesn't seem like he's ever been questioned about this case in relation to why he gave Epstein so much money, how, he decided to give him such great control over his companies, etc. Because here's what happened. He gave Epstein power of attorney, giving him the power to make major decisions for his brands, his companies. He gave him also the most prominent and most expensive mansion in Manhattan, privately owned mansion, worth $77 million. It might not have been worth quite that much now, but when I think that he was arrested for the final time, it was worth that. And he gave him many dozens of millions more. And this guy just wasn't questioned. There were people at his company, even CEOs and executives, coming up to Wexner and saying, "Hey, what are you doing? Who is this guy? Why is he involved in our companies now, making major decisions, sitting on the board, basically acting as your power of attorney?" And some of those people got frozen out. There's testimony about this that you can see online. There are even cases where he would pose as a talent scout for Victoria's Secret. He would go to these impressionable young women trying to work for Victoria's Secret, pretend to be a talent scout, and then basically abusing them or, harassing them. And it became such an issue that people from Victoria's Secret, multiple executives, went up to Les Wexner and said, hey, what are you doing? This guy is representing us horribly. He's basically tanking our company and imperiling our reputation by doing this. And again, it seems like Les Wexner didn't even, respond to that at all. And in fact, behaved in a way that questioned their mentality rather than Epstein, this newcomer who wasn't around these companies long. It really is just completely unexplainable why Epstein received so much wealth from Wexner. And Wexner is one of the most prominent, charitable drivers of pro-Zionist and pro-Israel causes in the U.S. in the last few decades. You can research that too, but he's been involved in lots of giving to pro-Israel causes. That's another angle of his life. Maybe we'll cover it at a different time. But yeah, thanks, Candace, for covering this story. Excellent story. Many of these things from Epstein's past really influenced him and how he behaved in the future. Not only kind of his emotional sensibilities, but also the tactics he used to bend powerful people to his will. And, we're seeing that now, but there's a lot of unanswered questions, and I hope we get them answered, but it doesn't look like this administration is going to answer them. In fact, Trump's now saying this is a hoax perpetrated by the Democrats. There were no Epstein files. It's just so absurd. The Democrats would have used this against Trump the first second they could, just like Russiagate. If they doctored documents or created a hoax or hoax documents, then what's the point of not releasing them? The whole thing doesn't even make sense. This is a clear cover-up. I hope we get answers. But let me know in the comments below, what do you think about Epstein's past? Do you agree with any of the assessments I've given or Candace has given? Are there any other interesting aspects you would like to look at or like to know in the Epstein case? What do you think's the hidden key to find out, who he truly worked for, the smoking gun that we're all looking for? Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Candace also. Great channel covering this story in depth, which I really appreciate. She's done some really hardcore research on this. And please consider becoming a YouTube member by clicking the join button below. If you do, you'll support the channel, which I will appreciate greatly. Plus, you get the ability to view all of my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.